The ABC premiered TV's first animated primetime series, The Flintstones. In honor of the anniversary, some Flintstones trivia. It was loosely based on the Honeymooners and originally aimed at adults.
Most people think they know the Flintstones. A prehistoric family. A pet dinosaur. A car powered by bare feet. Yabba dabba doo. But what if almost everything you assumed about the most famous cartoon family in history was wrong? What if the show that defined Saturday morning childhoods was never actually made for children at all? What if the cheerful theme song, the silly gadgets, and the laughing neighbors were all hiding something far stranger, far darker, and far more complicated than anyone realized? Because once you start pulling on the threads, the world of Bedrock unravels in ways that will genuinely disturb you. Let's start with something almost nobody talks about anymore. The Flintstones did not begin as a children's cartoon. It premiered on September 30th, 1960, in primetime, airing on Friday nights at 8:30 p.m. on ABC. This was prime adult television real estate. The show was positioned alongside news programs, variety shows, and family dramas. The people who created it, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, were chasing something very specific. After years of making cartoons that had been quietly reclassified as children's entertainment, they wanted to prove they could produce something for grown-ups. The Flintstones was their answer. It was pitched as animated comedy for adults. And to drive that point home, they found a sponsor that made the whole thing impossible to misread. Winston Cigarettes funded the show during its first 2 seasons. Not in the way that brands sponsor programs today, with logos on banners and quick commercials. Winston was woven directly into the fabric of the series itself. Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble appeared in fully animated promotional segments that ran inside the episodes. They smoked on screen. They praised the taste. They sang the Winston jingle. And those jingles were not vague. They were specific, enthusiastic endorsements of cigarettes delivered by the main characters of the show. In one segment, Fred and Barney crept behind the house like teenagers sneaking a smoke, only to be discovered by their wives. It was played for laughs, but the message was clear. Smoking was what the men of Bedrock did. It was normal. It was fun. It was cool. What makes this genuinely chilling in retrospect is what happened to the people who voiced those characters. Every single original cast member who brought the Flintstones to life developed serious smoking-related illness. Alan Reed, the original voice of Fred Flintstone, died of heart disease and emphysema. B.A. Bernadette, the beloved voice of Betty Rubble, died of lung cancer. Jean Vander Pyl, who voiced Wilma for over 4 decades, also died of lung cancer. Mel Blank, the legendary voice of Barney Rubble, died of heart disease and emphysema as well. Even Henry Corden, who stepped in to replace Reed as Fred in later years, died of emphysema. The actor who later voiced Wilma's son confirmed that practically everyone on the production smoked, and that many of them struggled badly with coughing during recording sessions. According to his account, those suppressed coughs are actually part of why Wilma and Betty developed their signature closed-mouth giggles. The sound of their laughter was shaped by the damage being done to their lungs. Winston ended its sponsorship in 1963, not because of health concerns, but because the show's audience was shifting younger. A baby had arrived in Bedrock and changed everything. But we will get to Pebbles in a moment, because before the birth episode, the story of that baby is already strange. Go back to the earliest planning stages of the show, and the child that Fred and Wilma were originally going to have was a boy. He was going to be named Fred Jr. Merchandise was already being designed around this character. Storyboards referenced him. The entire creative direction assumed a son. Then an executive from the Ideal Toy Company flew to Hollywood and delivered a single observation. A girl doll would sell significantly better than a boy doll. That was it. That was the entire reason. Joseph Barbera heard the argument, accepted it almost immediately, and the unborn child of the Flintstones changed gender. She became Pebbles. One meeting with a toy company executive rewrote the genetics of television's most famous fictional pregnancy. The launch of Pebbles became one of the most elaborate marketing operations television had ever attempted up to that point. Executives from advertising agencies and network offices flew across the country to coordinate the rollout. A national contest invited viewers to guess the newborn's birth weight, and more than 600,000 entries arrived. The winner, a butcher from Florida, received a round-the-world trip and a generous sum of spending money. Newspaper advertisements for Pebbles dolls were timed to run on the exact same day as the birth episode, with the plan mapped out in precise sequence. See the advertisement. Watch the program that evening. Buy the doll the following morning. Within 2 months, the Ideal Toy Company had sold 3 million Pebbles dolls and generated revenue of around $20 million in early 1960s money. For context, the birth episode's ratings were comparable to those of the famous I Love Lucy birth episode from nearly a decade earlier. And in a coincidence that borders on the surreal, Jean Vunder Pyl, the woman voicing Wilma Flintstone through her fictional labor, gave birth to her own actual child on the very same day the episode aired. The name of the show itself was almost completely different, and the reason it changed involves lawyers. The original title was The Flagstones. Everyone on the team liked it. It had a solid, Stone Age ring to it, and Bill Hanna later admitted he always preferred it. Then Mort Walker, the cartoonist behind the newspaper comic strip Hi and Lois, noticed that his strip featured a family with the same surname. His legal team sent notice, and suddenly the Flagstones needed a new identity. The show briefly became the Gladstones, named after a Los Angeles telephone exchange, before finally settling into the name that became one of the most recognizable in television history. The Flintstones. A title born entirely from legal pressure. Now consider the dark shadow hanging over the character Fred has embodied since the very first episode. Fred Flintstone is a compulsive gambler, and the show treated this with a seriousness that feels almost jarring when you go back and watch it. In one early episode, his childhood nickname is revealed to be Betting Freddy. The mere sound of the word bet causes him to go into a visible spiral, stammering and repeating it. Wilma explains to another character that Fred once gambled away absolutely everything the family owned and had been forced to see a psychiatrist because his habit was so severe. This is not a throwaway joke. It is backstory presented as trauma. And it returns again and again. Fred bets his entire weekly paycheck on dinosaur races. He loses the vacation fund in slot machines and then suggests selling the family car just to cover food. A gambling addiction specialist who later analyzed the character concluded that Fred displayed nearly every recognized symptom of a genuine gambling disorder, including the inability to stop despite consequences and the compulsive chasing of losses. This was running through a primetime cartoon aimed at American families in the early 1960s, wrapped inside pterodactyl jokes and bowling alleys. The physical humor in the Flintstone household also ages in uncomfortable directions when you pay attention. Much of the slapstick involving Fred and Wilma draws from a tradition of domestic conflict played as comedy, but some of it goes further than audiences typically remember. Wilma regularly drops bowling balls on Fred's feet or strikes him when he goes too far. In the very first episode, Fred is so terrified of being hit that he shouts in panic just before the sound of an impact fills the room. The show borrowed this dynamic directly from The Honeymooners, which itself walked a similar line between comedy and something more uncomfortable. Speaking of The Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason was not pleased when the Flintstones premiered. His lawyers told him he likely had a winnable case and could potentially force the show off the air entirely. Gleason considered it seriously. What stopped him, according to his own later account, was not affection for the cartoon but the fear that history would remember him as the man who destroyed something children loved. He let it go. He received no money and no credit, and a lawsuit was never filed. Then there is the 2001 television special that almost no one has seen, and that its own creators seem to have quietly abandoned. The Flintstones on the Rocks aired once on Cartoon Network in November of that year and was never broadcast again. It was never released on home video through official channels. The special shows Fred and Wilma on the verge of separation, attending couples therapy, and struggling through a marriage that has reached a genuine crisis. There are suggestions of infidelity. Uncomfortable moments unfold as both couples realize they can hear each other through the shared wall of their homes. Fred makes remarks that carry openly prejudiced undertones. The entire special plays without a laugh track, and the absence of that familiar cushion makes every difficult moment land harder. The rating was technically suitable for general audiences, but its emotional content was closer to an adult drama than anything Hanna-Barbera had previously produced under the Flintstones name. After that single broadcast, it effectively vanished, surviving only in recordings passed between fans. While the show was on the air, one of the most genuinely frightening events in the production's history nearly ended the voice of Barney Rubble forever. On January 24, 1961, Mel Blanc was driving along Sunset Boulevard when another vehicle struck his car head-on at a curve so dangerous it had earned the nickname Dead Man's Curve. The collision was catastrophic. Blanc sustained a triple skull fracture, broken ribs, fractures in both legs, a shattered pelvis, and 6 fractured vertebrae. He entered a coma that lasted approximately 2 weeks. Doctors exhausted conventional approaches trying to reach him. Then a neurologist tried something unusual. He addressed Blanc not as a patient, but as his characters. He asked Bugs Bunny how he was feeling. After a long silence, a faint voice answered back in Bugs' familiar drawl, said he was just fine, and asked how the doctor was doing. When asked about Tweety Bird, the voice that came back said he thought he saw a putty tat. Mel Blanc's son later confirmed the story. The characters that lived inside Mel Blanc apparently reached him when nothing else could. The vitamins deserve their own moment of strangeness. In 1968, Flintstone chewable vitamins appeared in pharmacies, produced by Miles Laboratories and eventually sold to Bayer. They became the most purchased children's vitamin brand in the United States, generating more than $100 million in annual revenue decades after launch. The cheerful advertising jingle was composed by a man named Martin O'Donnell, who would later become famous for writing the music of the Halo video game franchise. Almost no one has ever noticed this connection. But here is the genuinely bizarre part. Betty Rubble was not in the vitamins for more than 25 years. Every other Flintstone character appeared in tablet form. Fred, Wilma, Barney, Pebbles, Bam Bam, Dino, even the Great Gazoo. The Flintstone car was made into a vitamin shape. Betty was excluded for a single, almost incomprehensibly mundane reason. Her thin waist kept snapping during the manufacturing process, and the company could not produce a structurally reliable Betty tablet. So she was simply left out. For a quarter century, a rock band eventually named itself Betty's Not a Vitamin in protest, and the name reportedly appeared on a published list of the greatest band names ever. The company finally added Betty to the lineup in 1995 after a telephone poll in which more than 15,000 people voted for her inclusion. The famous theme song most people associate with the show was not actually used during the first 2 seasons. The original Flintstones opened with a simpler instrumental called Rise and Shine. The beloved Meet the Flintstones theme did not arrive until season 3, and when it became enormously popular, it was quietly edited into earlier episodes in syndication, creating the false impression that it had always been there. Musicologists have noted that the melody draws structurally from a passage in a Beethoven piano sonata composed in 1801. A survey conducted in the United Kingdom found that the Flintstones theme remained the single most recognized children's television theme among adults surveyed,